Well, thank you for joining us again for our third episode. Today we're going to be talking about employee onboarding because Sarah and I are both quite passionate about making sure that this is done right. And so we're going to talk to you today about, what would good look like in terms of employee onboarding. So Sarah is our HR expert, and she's going to now tell us a little bit about kind of the expectations on HR to help bring somebody on board and make them feel welcome. And then I'll talk about what we need to consider from a cultural perspective or from a CQ perspective. So Sarah, last time we were talking about job descriptions and recruiting. So let's now assume that we've brought the person on board. Today is their first day. And is there anything we should have done before today? Do
you know what?
I mean, there's lots of things.
There's lots of stuff, really. But I think we need to, assuming the person has accepted the job offer, and for me, that's when the onboarding starts. And if I had a magic wand that we could do this ideally, and this is what we're talking about as an ideal state of play, because I mean, obviously, you and I both recognise that there's lots of different companies in Dubai with different structures, different setups, and different people with different expectations and experience of what HR looks like and what good looks like. So some of this might be really basic to some people, and to others it might be a new idea for them. So we're just going to run through everything, and if it's not earth-shattering for you, that's okay. It might be for somebody else, but if, as with anything, if you watch this and you've got any comments, then put it in the box. Maybe there's something we haven't thought about. Put it in the comments on LinkedIn and leave a comment on YouTube. So once the person's received their offer letter and obviously accepted their offer letter, the process starts really of onboarding the person into the business, and that starts the process of their visa. Now, every employee needs a visa pretty much to work, or at least a work permit of some description, to work with a company in the UAE. And that process should start before they join the new company. There is obviously a bit of a period. If they're already working for someone in the UAE, they finish their notice period and they won't get their existing visa cancellation document until they finish their notice period, which means the new company can't start their process until that happens. But if it's an employee that's working outside of the UAE, for example, or not working in the UAE at the moment, then you don't need to wait for that. You can start the visa process. The one thing that I would request of all HR is that if you're hiring people from overseas, please process their visa before they come. It just makes the whole process seamless for them. If you've got the capacity to apply for their employment visa so that they can get that stamped at the airport when they arrive, it just makes life so much easier, and it's so much less stressful for the employee as well.
Yeah.
So that then is where that process starts. Now, for me as well, in an ideal scenario, onboarding also includes educating the individual about the company that they're going to join, the business unit they're joining, the team that they're joining, looking at the vision, the values, the mission statement if you have one for your business, the customs and practice, the ethics of the business, what are your expectations before they hit the ground. So before they actually even rock up for work on the first day, that should all really use the time in between to build that relationship and to build that communication with them and the understanding and awareness, because it helps them no end. It also, if you've got someone who's coming to the UAE for the first time, who's not maybe worked here before or never visited on holiday, has got no awareness of what the culture is like or the structure, and I know, Emma, you can shed some light on this, but it helps them settle faster. It sort of gives them peace of mind that it's a real company, because there's so many scams going on at the moment, that it's a real job offer. They've got their visa, so they don't need to worry about that side of things. And also the planning in terms of their arrival, their joining date, what their expectations are, where they need to go, who's going to pick them up from the airport, all that kind of good stuff needs to happen. I've heard some real horror stories and have been on the receiving end of some crazy situations with bringing people from outside of country, and where individuals have committed to a new joiner that this is, sent them a photograph and details of this is what the accommodation is going to be like, so you don't need to worry about X, Y, Z. And then when the person arrives, it's a complete hovel and things like this. So, you've got to be true about it when you are bringing people in and sharing that information, but the more you can share with them, the better, because it will help them settle. And, I've brought people on board from overseas, from China in the past, from Vietnam, from Sri Lanka, India, Philippines, either as individuals or en masse. And it really does make a difference when you have that pre-arrival conversation. From a cultural perspective, and maybe you can help us understand what type of things we can think about from that to help people settle in their new job when they arrive.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's assume that the person's come from overseas. It might even be their first international assignment. They may live or come from a place which is a predominantly monocultural place, meaning that there's not a lot of diversity in their home country. And so they're maybe only exposed to kind of one type of culture. And then when you come to Dubai, which, as we know, is so diverse, then it can be quite overwhelming, just because you don't understand why somebody did something the way they did it, because that isn't necessarily the way that you would do it. It takes some getting used to. And then on top of that, you're also just trying to get settled in and trying to find a way that you can make this place feel home. So you find that in the first couple of months, a new employee is basically going through culture shock likely.
Yep.
And so, their emotions are going to be up and down like a roller coaster. They'll initially kind of go through that honeymoon phase of, wow, I've moved countries and there's loads of new things.
All the Instagram moments.
Yeah, loads of new things to go and experience that maybe you can't do back home. And in some cases, because there isn't maybe the same tax responsibilities like there may be in their home country, they all of a sudden as well have a lot more expendable cash potentially as well in some cases. So I think there's lots of things that make it kind of a honeymoon period at the beginning, but as time goes on, the individual, might realise I've got no friends, so weekends are dull, and they might realise that they don't always, understand everybody in the office. They may not necessarily feel like they have a place in the office, because sometimes you find that some organisations will have a dominant nationality working in them. And if you're not from that nationality, you might feel like you don't fit in. So there's all of the emotions that come with that as well. But outside of that, it's just, now you're in a place where there are so many different cultures. How do you get to grips with working with all of those different cultures? So in terms of onboarding, I often see that companies either do nothing, or they might offer some cultural training in terms of let's learn about the Emirati culture. But I think that actually companies need to go beyond that and actually be training individuals about how do they work with all different cultures, because let's face it, you aren't necessarily only going to be working with Emiratis, you're going to be working with people from all different places. And you need to be able to understand, how is that going to impact the way that we communicate with one another? And, how is that going to influence the way that I'm received by my colleagues? I think often there's a lot of work as well put into maybe the new person joining the team, but there's maybe not enough work done on those that are in the existing team in terms of the cultural dynamics of the new person joining, because they may operate in an entirely different way to the rest of their team joining. How are we educating the rest of the team to make sure when this new joiner joins the team that we welcome them and we welcome them with open arms?
I completely agree with everything that you've said. And being someone who moved as an individual into the GCC by myself, and luckily the company that I worked with, I had an interview in that country. It was Kuwait, so I was taken over for an interview. So I got to see the country, meet the people face to face that I was working with. But I still didn't have a lot of cultural awareness. I was working with a Kuwaiti company, and had a level of understanding but didn't know a lot. And I was super lucky because my boss at the time, I'm forever grateful, used to come and sit with me and explain to me about the local cultures and the Arabic culture, Islam as a faith, and just to make sure that I felt part of the family and part of the team that was there, which was really super important. And I think that's something we often forget as well. Whilst Dubai is a multicultural country, it can be really overwhelming as a young person arriving here for the first time. Maybe if we consider from people coming from overseas, students coming from, people who've just left university, coming over from China, for example, who don't necessarily speak English all that well. There isn't an awful lot written in Chinese over here, there is more and more these days. But things like, where's the nearest Chinese supermarket? Where can they get their familial products? Where can they go shopping? What does different things look like? And I often, even till now, have conversations with candidates that I'm recruiting for when I talk to them about salaries, and this is even pre-making an offer, is I will send them a link for Carrefour or Lulu, for example, and tell them to go shopping, like fill a basket with what you would normally buy and have a look and see what is available so that they can understand what products are available, that it's not quite as restrictive as people believe it is, that yes, actually, there is pretty much almost nothing that you can't get here, and that they can be comfortable and cook the way they want to cook and eat the food that they're used to, and use the products that they're familiar with. Because when I first arrived, and this is going back to 2007 into the region, and this is mostly for the female side of things, but there was certain sanitary products that you just couldn't get over here because it's not part of the culture to be used, without going into too much detail. But understanding that side of things makes, somebody before they arrive, makes it more comfortable. And I know
just so everyone knows, it's changed since then, right?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. There's some ridiculous, no
issues there anymore.
No issues there anymore. But it's that type of understanding and awareness that makes somebody feel more comfortable. You've got language changes, temperature changes, you've got transport changes, you've got, signage, you've got food, you've got all these different things, even time zones. There's a lot of people, we forget, we take it for granted these days that we can hop on an aeroplane and go from one country to another. But there's still people who haven't done that before, and to be in a different time zone from their family is still a new thing, and to help them through that, how to set up a mobile phone, how to get the right voice over internet product so that you can call home for as reasonable a price as possible. All these types of information can help somebody settle into a work. And from my perspective, this is really important because we put such high expectations on individuals when they join a company. They're supposed to hit the ground running.
Yeah.
And that's a really common blue sky phrase that everybody uses. Let's hit the ground running with this one, and this person they've done this job before, so they can, really shine on their first day. But you've got to set people up for success. And doing that is making sure that they fit into and feel comfortable and settle into the culture that they're in. The cultural element of the understanding the culture of the business is super important for individuals, but within a team. And I think it depends on the type of business that you're working in and the type of work that you're doing. Or do you think it would be something that could be across the board?
Well, I was just thinking about, what you're saying there in terms of what's the culture like in an organisation, because you could even be, for example, working now with the same company, but you've just got an internal transfer within your organisation over here, and you might be kind of under the impression that, well, I've worked for this company already, or I already work for this company, so it can't be too hard, right? But then when you get here, all of a sudden it's so different, because even if the company does have kind of an underlying culture that stems from where they're headquartered, the culture locally within that organisation is going to look vastly different, and it's determined based on the culture and the nationalities of the people that are working within the organisation. So you could get here and still have quite a big surprise and shock. And I think there's a common mistake that if somebody's technically competent in their role, then that they will see success when they then take an international assignment. And that's not always the case, because you can be technically competent in your own culture, but drop you down in a new culture where things are done in an entirely different way, and all of a sudden you're going to face difficulties.
Yeah.
And so I think that there does need to be a piece around how do we educate people to become more culturally intelligent, so that they understand, they have that level of self-awareness of the fact that, okay, this is the way I operate and function. However, it may not necessarily be the same for everybody else in the team. And how do we then make sure that when we're working together, we work together effectively?
Yeah, that's a very good point about the moving within a company cross countries or globally, because we do see so many companies that set up over here that are global companies. So, for example, I mean, if we look in, you've got Oracle, you've got Microsoft, you've got Apple, for example, all of these big tech firms. There's lots of banks that have done the same. Lots of other industries, oil and gas are very common as well, that will pick up and open a regional office in the Middle East and set up there. And, I've spoken to a number of individuals that have had exactly the experience that you're saying, where they've worked for a company and they've been moved over, and what their expectation is from where they've been working with that particular company in another region, in maybe in the UK or in the US, has been completely different to how it's worked over here. And it's meant that they've not succeeded in their role. They've not felt comfortable. They've not been able to achieve what they want to achieve. And I think something else as well, when you're looking at particular types of roles, I think that then becomes also really important. If we look at things like sales roles, where you've got a very outward-facing role from a business and that are dealing with a vast majority of different customers, maybe there's more of a cultural requirement, an education requirement there from that communication perspective. I mean, somebody selling a car in the UK, for example, might be very different, or in the US or whatever, might be very different process or different communication style, or habitual style that you would have to doing it in the UAE or any other GCC country for that matter. So I think it's super, it's really quite a strong point to be remembered to do that cultural piece.
Yeah, and I think, some organisations, so we've talked about, how does the employee behave or respond when they've come from within a company moving here, but how does the HR team then respond to that? And I've often seen situations where it's assumed, well, because they're from within the business, they don't really need an onboarding process because they know everything they need to know. And in terms of, I don't know, company process and policies, perhaps they do. But, processes and policies can be vastly different across different countries. I've observed that before myself firsthand. We would do something one way in the UK, and then when I arrived here in the corporate space into the organisation, we did the same thing but an entirely different way.
Yeah.
And that was to do with either the company, country's legislation, like legal requirements of the country here. But there's also, an assumption that you would know, everything you need to know, and people forget the piece of, and how do we make the person, feel psychologically safe in terms of, I come to work, I know what to expect when I get there, and then I've got a place to go home to, even if it's just a temporary space until they get their Emirates ID. But, I've even heard some horror stories about that as well, where, whilst somebody's in the throes of having their visa and Emirates ID sorted, they have kind of, the hotel period that the company covers is now lapsed, and they're kind of being told, well, you need to sort yourself out now. And it's very difficult as a person to be able to do that. One, you're new in the country, you don't really know how things work. But two, you can't get a rental because you haven't got your Emirates ID. You're now then trying to source, a hotel space or a bed space, whatever that looks like for you. And what you want is that you go to work and you come home and you've got somewhere to sleep. You don't want to be worrying about where am I going to stay tonight. So I'm sure you've got worse horror stories than I've got.
Yeah, there's also that impacts on somebody's performance at work, never mind their mental health. And there's that, quite often companies will overlook and forget that person might be camping somewhere.
Yeah, there's this like, well, we've done what we're obligated to do.
Yeah.
And then like, yes, but do you want them to enjoy working for you?
Yeah,
Do you want to care for your staff?
Yeah.
Do you want them to say good things about your brand?
Yeah.
There's a way to look after an individual, and then
absolutely.
there's a way to look after them, right?
Absolutely. You know, look, and not to be too much of a legal bugbear here, but, you know, under the employer's obligations within the labour law, there is a requirement to pay and cover somebody's accommodation, either to physically give them somewhere to stay and pay for it by the company, or to pay them an allowance to do so. Now, that gets tricky in the first month, 2 months of somebody arriving in the country or joining a new company, because if we stick with arriving in the country new for a minute, you know, that person's going to arrive, you put them up in a hotel. How long do you put them up in a hotel for? 5 days, 10 days, 1 month. There's no legislation that says how long it should be, other than you should provide accommodation. Now, you've then got a catch-22 of, well, if I'm paying for accommodation, should I pay them the allowance out of their salary as well? And that is a business decision that needs to be made. If I was being asked, I would say yes, because the person needs the money to be able to pay for their rent for the future. Because as we know, living here, rents are paid in advance, not in reverse. And they're also paid every quarter, or every 6 months, or every year. You know, the availability of monthly rentals here is an awful lot less than it's more now than it ever used to be, but it's still not very prevalent. And that sort of flat share market that you have in many other countries just isn't available here, because it's not legally allowed to be available. And that's something to be cognizant of. So I would say do as much as you can in that first month or 2 months in terms of taking care of accommodation for a new joiner into the country at any level of the business, be it a junior person or a more senior person, to ensure that they are set up to succeed and to feel comfortable and happy and taken care of by the business, because you are technically responsible for them. And I mean, as Emma, you say, I've heard of lots of horror stories. I've been on the receiving end of some interesting situations myself, with accommodation, and spent time living in hotel rooms and things like this. And you do make the best of the situation that you're in, and being a professional that you are, you do what you can. But again, it does impact your mental health. It does impact your performance. And it can make it extremely difficult and extremely challenging to continue, and makes you question, do I even want to stay here?
Yeah.
If the company doesn't care about my well-being to provide me with a sensible place to live, then you've got that ... question, which is not something you should be having in the first month, especially if you've up sticks from your family in another country and moved over. So looking at that, then looking at people who are in country already, they've probably already got accommodation arranged. If they haven't and they've got accommodation provided by their employers, then they just need to shift, and it's a fairly straightforward process. But the mindful thing on this from an employer's perspective is having that visa process as streamlined as possible. Now, the Ministry of Labour have taken great strides in the last months and years to improve the processing time of, and not just the Ministry of Labour, but the immigration as well, to improve the processing time of visas. So as we know, you have to apply for permission to work, and you have to apply for a visa residency to stay in the country, and then that gets attributed to your passport and your record, essentially as an individual, which is known as a change of status situation. Once that is done, you then have 3 key elements that need to be completed, one of which is your Emirates ID application, one of which is your medical insurance, and one of which is your Fit to Work medical that needs to happen here. Fit to Work medicals are readily available. They don't take a lot of time to actually have them done, like physically present yourself to a medical centre, and the results can be in anything from an hour, depending on which centres you use, up to 48 hours, or 2 or 3 days. It depends. It's obviously financial, depends, the more money you pay, the quicker you get it. But there are options available. With your Emirates ID, if you're new to the country or have never had an Emirates ID before, then you need to do biometrics, which is your fingerprints and your eye scans. You need to have an appointment to do that, and appointments are hard to come by. In some instances, they can be booked out for weeks and months in advance. It depends on the availability of the centres. Now, there are options to go around that, and I urge employers to go and find out what those options are. There are companies that provide the medical test results, the Fit to Work medical test results, and the Emirates ID biometrics results and applications completed within an hour. So there's not really an excuse for it taking 2, 3 or 4 weeks for that to be processed. Most companies, all companies, should have medical insurance as a company policy, and any employee who joins a business should automatically be assigned on that as soon as they possibly can be. Some insurance companies will allow a person to be on a medical insurance before that change of status has been completed and have like a temporary setup. Others say, no, we can't, we'll just have to wait until after that change of status and your visa is done and in process.
And just on that even, if you're a new employee and you're not from the region and you don't understand how the medical insurance works, it's even helpful just for somebody to sit down with you and go, right, these are the emergency contact numbers should something happen to you. Let's work out where's your nearest GP and hospital. Should there be an emergency situation, these are the things that these are the steps you should take. If you don't want to be in an emergency situation and not know what to do or who to contact.
Especially with your health, that's something really important. Anything could happen. You could have an accident. And the employer has a responsibility to take care of somebody's medical coverage, regardless of whether that's on the insurance or not. So if that employee has an accident through no fault of their own, gets unfortunately, in touch wood, it doesn't happen to anyone, but knocked over on a pedestrian crossing, by a scooter, that person needs medical attention. If they don't have insurance, the employer has to pay for it. It's their responsibility. So the employer needs to get people on insurance as quickly as possible. But that communication to the employee of, here's your nearest centre, here's a number you call, is really, really important. And that kind of information, along with the process that I've just mentioned about the Emirates ID and things, all needs to be communicated before they get here. Like, this is how long it's going to take. This is what we need to do. These are the documents we need for it. Make sure that they've got the right photographs so the Emirates ID doesn't get held up. There's really specific requirements these days, the same as there are with passports and things. So and that information is readily available. So there is no reason for an HR department or HR team within a company not to know that somebody's passport photo is not going to meet the requirements for the Emirates ID application. There's plenty of awareness to be able to say, no, you need to get this done and get it done in good time, like before they leave their own country or the minute they arrive. Okay, your first 2 days are going to be, we need to get this done, we need to get this done, we need to get this done, and then the HR rep drives around with them and gets it finished to make sure that it's all done as quickly and promptly as possible to support them in their process. So once all of that has been done, the applications go through to the Department of Immigration, and they will then approve it and issue what used to be a physical stamp in your passport and is now a digital stamp, essentially, and also your Emirates ID card. So your Emirates ID card is your national identity card. It has your photograph on it. It has your name, your position, your date of birth. You have a unique identifier number, which is too long for me to remember. And it also has your place of work on it. There is a chip on it as well, which means it can be used in certain transactions and certain government centres as a validation of who you are, with fingerprints and things like going through the airport and stuff like this. So it's important to have it. The Emirates ID is linked to so much in this country. It's linked to your driving license, it's linked to mobile phones, it's linked to bank accounts, it's linked to renting apartments and things like this, that if it's delayed, it can have such a big knock-on effect on everything else that the person needs to have.
And you becoming...
To just be
feeling settled.
Be here. So it's something that, is really important, that onboarding. And this is why, for me, I stress that the onboarding process doesn't start when they hit the ground here, like when the flight lands or when they rock up to work on the first day, way before. So that all of that can be seamless. And really, HR departments need to put time and effort into making sure that they have the right information, that they have the up-to-date requirements and documents well in advance of when it's needed, so that it can be seamless, and build the relationships with the companies that can support you to get those processes done as quickly as possible. And then the cultural piece, Emma, just to finish off quickly, because I think it's super important.
I think,
as I've mentioned,
there's research that shows that 40% of international assignments fail. And 70% of the ones that fail is because of the family, as in it's not necessarily the assignee, like the employee that you've taken on, that makes it fail. It's actually the family that they've brought with them. So I suppose also part of the onboarding is thinking about how are we not only supporting the employee, but what are we doing to actually support their family as well? How are we making sure that it's easy to get the kids into school? Can we provide information about the schooling before they arrive? Are we able to support them in terms of finding, the right place for them to stay within Dubai, within their allowance? Are we helping to support the spouse with, understanding how to network and the importance of networking in the region? Let's not forget,
isolating.
That's very isolating. They've potentially given up their career to support their spouse, your employee, to take this job, and now they're at home with no career. The kids have gone off to school and they've got no, friendship circle. They phone home. Home says, well, if you're not enjoying it, come home.
Yeah.
And so, it's really tough. So as also when we're thinking about onboarding, how are we supporting the family as well?
That's really important. That's something we haven't had the chance to touch on. And I think we need to remember those statistics and maybe pick it up in another episode, because I'm sure there's an awful lot we can unpick there as well on what good looks like in terms of that total family onboarding to the business. It's been an absolute pleasure as always, Emma. Thank you so much. And I look forward to you talking again. What are we talking about next time?
Performance management.
Oh, right. Okay. So another favourite of mine. Excellent.
We're going through the life cycle of an employee, basically.
Awesome. Okay. Fabulous. Thank you for reminding me. So we'll catch up again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks.